Welcome everyone to the next installment of Ampersand View, which is a series of interviews with the Ampersand members. Ampersand, as I hope many of you know, is Clarion Gaming's research and networking think tank that currently has around 2,000 members who meet regularly to network, to socialize, to exchange industry views. Today, we have a pleasure of talking with one of our most engaged members, actually, who has participated in many discussions organized with the members of Ampersand, and that's Anne-Marie Fortschegger, who is the Secretary General of the Portuguese Online Gambling Association, but has also previously worked for bwin and also GVC Group, always in a public affairs capacity. And it is actually the expansion into new markets, public affairs, and kind of industry moving and expanding and growing its business through geographical expansion that we'll be talking about today. Hello, Anne-Marie. Welcome to the Ampersand View. Thank you so much for agreeing to speak with us today. So jumping straight into the topic, expansion into new markets has consistently been ranked in all of our surveys, including the surveys with the Ampersand members, as the top opportunity for the industry. Why is that the case? Is this really the best opportunity that the industry has to grow its business?
First of all, thank you very much, Eva, for having me, and also welcome from my side. Well, that's a very interesting question, Eva. I think expansion to other markets is something that we see across all industries, of course, and particularly in the e-commerce, because to some extent it's simply easier. And when we look at online gambling, we have now a history from around 20, 25 years. And for the first time, we see really mature, saturated markets in Europe. When we look back 10 years ago, we still had a lot of gray markets. Meanwhile, 25 out of 27 member states offer a multi-licensing regime. And some regimes are already 10, 15 years old. So there is not so much room for maneuver. Meanwhile, and nonetheless, the expertise still sits with Europe because Europe is one of the most mature markets and most technology-wise progressive markets. And we see that now many other regions in the world start or already regulated partially and at a very fast pace. So there is simply the opportunity to move and to expand to other markets. The US are very quick in regulating across all states. Meanwhile, more than half of all states have already a sports betting regulation. Latin America is regulating, re-regulating some African states. So we simply see the opportunity for big companies or also smaller companies to move to additional markets based on legal certainty. And legal certainty is insofar important because it allows for a viable business model to be calculated, which is not only valid for a couple of years, but it creates kind of stability in growth.
Thank you. And as you say, there's a lot of markets that are already quite mature that have opened. There are others that are opening right now. They're creating the regulatory frameworks. And every time a new market opens, one needs to really approach it individually, right? Due to the regulatory requirements that are often so unique to each country. But we can also learn from one another. As you say, so many markets are already mature and have had those previous experiences. So one can learn from the other experiences instead of reinventing the wheel. So as someone who has gone through and drove the regulatory process in one and many of the European jurisdictions, what would you say are the kind of top three most important considerations that everyone needs to make every time they are approaching a new jurisdiction?
I think what we learned over the last 15 years mainly is that different models can work. And it's not only about the amount of text and the product lineup, although these are the key pillars of any regulation, but one has to really assess the whole legal framework, starting with the licensing conditions, moving over to the standards for responsible gambling, how is advertising regulated, how is the KYC process set up, how does responsible gambling look like, how enforcement, for instance, that is also very important, how the regulator makes sure that licensed operators are protected. It is important to assess how many licenses will be probably in a market. So it's not only about one or two factors, it's about many. And the funny thing, as you said at the beginning, each and every state, although they have all the same aim, namely protecting customers, are sometimes quite creative in developing new ideas, requirements, and standards. And this is particularly to explain against historical, social backgrounds. But as you say, one could learn from each other, and many regulators do so, because one should not underestimate that regulators really make the effort to go and study different legal frameworks. For instance, the US did, Brazil did, they both went to Europe, they went both also to the European Commission. But also if you compare the regulatory systems within Europe, you see similarities. For instance, the Portuguese looked very closely at France, Denmark, Spain. Sweden looked at Denmark. Colombia, for instance, looked at Spain. So it's not that they reinvent completely a system. They just do kind of cherry picking and also let it fit into their overall legal system, I'd say.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so we've talked about new markets, new jurisdictions, and expansion. Let's talk about those mature markets as well. You know, obviously, Portuguese market opened up some time ago. It's functioning well, but I'm sure it's not that you can now just relax, and there are new challenges ahead. So as you observe what's happening, the discussions in Portugal, but actually just generally in Europe and in all of those more mature jurisdictions that have been functioning for quite some time, what do you see as regulatory trends? What it is that the industry should really be watching out for going forward?
Well, I think I start with the positive points. What I observe across all jurisdictions and also operators, everybody embraces new technologies. And artificial intelligence, for instance, is not only relevant to individualize products and advertising, but also to better protect customers in the sense that these new tools allow to in fact identify those who need help, and I think that is very, very crucial. Then we see, of course, a development in products. The millennials generation, for instance, is very keen in getting offers for esports. Then we have, it's not necessarily a new trend, but we see this move towards mobile. People simply gamble via their smartphones, and the PC becomes less and less important. Another not so positive development, at least in Europe, are the restrictions, further restrictions, in particularly when it comes to advertising. Italy, but now meanwhile also Lithuania, totally prohibited advertising. Many countries dramatically restricted advertising, and that is insofar crucial because advertising is one of the reasons why operators are also interested in applying for licenses due to the legal certainty. So how shall customers know what is legal and what is not if you can't advertise it as a licensed operator? I think here And I understand the reasoning behind restrictions. You have sometimes in a market up to 100 licensees, and they all want to advertise. So the public mood changes, and when the public mood changes, politics reacts. So I think here one has to rethink certain patterns and structures, and also rethink how advertising and also sponsorships can be maintained in a healthy way, because to totally prohibit it, I don't think it is the solution. In addition, even we've seen during the lockdown that in Italy, we experienced quite a substantial growth, although there was no advertising. Whereas in other countries with a lot of advertising, the growth was relatively modest. So this being said, I think introducing restrictions makes sense when we really know whether this is helpful or not.
And actually, so I want to continue on the positive note in my last question to you. As we hopefully, fingers crossed, are coming out of the pandemic, are there any positive developments that in the industry that you would like to actually see retained going forward?
What I observed, and I think that is extremely positive, countries realize they need the online sector regulated. First of all, it is a natural development towards online, logically. Younger generations simply want to gamble online. And those countries who had already a regulation in place, they were much more successful in mitigating all those closures during the pandemic. So I think that we see today this accelerated pace of regulations has to do with this fact. Then, at least in Portugal, I experienced that the regulator was very willing to support the industry to be more flexible by adapting also certain rules during the pandemic, when it comes, for instance, in Portugal to the betting lineup, because we in Portugal have an edited betting lineup defined by the regulator. And then I saw a lot of research. Countries were very curious in finding out how the gambling behavior changed during the pandemic. Some countries more, some countries less, but we urgently need as much research as possible, so to reduce the randomness of the introduction of new rules, I think.
Great. And then on that positive note, and with a call for more evidence or evidence-based regulation, I suppose, I would like to thank you very much for this interview, and I hope to see you in one of the Ampersand meetings digitally, but also, finally live, hopefully soon. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Eva. It was a pleasure, and hope to speak soon again. Bye-bye.